In 1975, a Soviet animator named Yuri Norstein released a 10-minute film about a hedgehog lost in the fog. No villains, no chase scenes, no jokes. Just a small creature walking through mist, looking for his friend. Nothing about it, on paper, sounds like it should have become the most acclaimed animated film on the planet. In 2003, at the La Puta Animation Festival in Tokyo, 140 animators and critics from around the world voted on the greatest animated film ever made. Not the greatest Soviet film, the greatest film, period. Hedgehog in the Fog came first. Nobody talks about Soviet cartoons, but they should. Soyuzmultfilm, Union Animation Film, was founded on June 10, 1936, when the Soviet government merged every animation group in Moscow under one roof. Its first building was, of all things, a converted church. It became the largest animation studio in Europe, and over its history produced more than 1,500 films. The studio was entirely state-funded. It did not need to sell toys. It did not need to court investors or test audiences. It had exactly one client, the Soviet state. Think about that for a second. An animation studio with no box office to hit, no shareholders to please, and, for decades, essentially no deadline pressure at all. Story goes that the decision to found the studio at all came from Stalin himself, who reportedly wanted a Soviet answer to the Disney cartoons already reaching audiences abroad. In its earliest years, Soviet animators openly studied and imitated Disney's techniques, before gradually developing an entirely different visual language of their own. This is the story of what happens when an entire national animation industry is handed the one thing commercial animation almost never gets: unlimited time, and the strange, sometimes extraordinary art that time alone can produce. It's also quietly a story about what a country decides to protect when almost nothing else about it is protected. And what happens to that protected thing once the country protecting it disappears. Soviet animation looked different from Western animation, and that difference was deliberate. Cut-out animation, move paper piece by paper piece, stop motion built from clay, fabric, and found objects. Paint on glass, actual oil paint. Manipulated wet on a sheet of glass, one frame photographed, then wiped away to paint the next. Norstein achieved the film's signature fog effect with a strikingly simple trick. A thin sheet of paper laid over the scene, lifted slowly toward the camera frame by frame until everything behind it dissolved into white. No computer, no special lens, just patience, applied one photograph at a time, thousands of times in a row. Reportedly, the whole 10-minute film took roughly 2 years to complete, an amount of time no commercially funded studio anywhere in the West could have justified for a single short. Take The Snow Queen from 1957, the Soviet adaptation of Hans Christian Andersen. The Ice Palace sequence alone, animated entirely by hand, reportedly took the better part of a year to complete. Decades later, Hayao Miyazaki cited it directly as a formative influence on his own work. Soviet animation shaping the man who would go on to shape Studio Ghibli. And no, this is not something anyone made up for effect. Every script and every frame passed through state censors, hunting for political dissent or Western influence, so animators learned to hide meaning in plain sight. New Pogodi, the Soviet answer to Tom and Jerry, followed a wolf endlessly chasing a hare, and audiences quietly rooted for the wolf, the hooligan, the petty criminal who never quite gets caught. Cheburashka, a strange creature with enormous ears who arrives in a crate of oranges with no species and no home, became one of the most beloved characters in Soviet history, because every Soviet citizen understood instinctively what it felt like to not quite belong. Then there's Winnie the Pooh, or rather, Winnie Pooh, created by Fyodor Kachuk between 1969 and 1972. Disney's bear is soft, cozy, safely narrated by an adult voice. Kachuk's bear is a round, restless chaos engine with no narrator and no safety net, navigating a world that refuses to make sense, which is, in miniature, the Soviet experience itself. Y.A. Milne's own granddaughter, Claire, Christopher Robin Milne's daughter, reportedly said the Soviet version came closer to her grandfather's original spirit than any other adaptation, Disney included. The Golden Collection era, roughly the early 1950s through the late 1980s, is generally considered the studio's creative peak, the period that produced almost every character that later generations would recognize instantly. Cheburashka and his crocodile friend Gina, the Brementown musicians, Umka the polar bear cub, and dozens more, each one drawn, painted, or sculpted by hand, frame by patient frame. Here's how the system actually let this happen. A studio with one client and no profit motive doesn't need to finish a film by a fiscal quarter. It needs to finish it well enough to satisfy state approval. And ideological approval, unlike box office approval, has no ticking clock attached to it. That single structural fact is what let a 10-minute short take 2 years and let a single sequence in a fairy tale take most of a year on its own. The censors, meanwhile, were trained to catch explicit political statements. A slogan, a symbol, an obvious joke about the party. They were far less equipped to catch a feeling, a hair the audience quietly loved more than the law he was breaking. A creature that didn't belong anywhere. Those slipped through again and again because the censorship apparatus was built to read scripts, not read longing. It's worth pausing on how strange that actually is. A system famous for controlling nearly every visible form of expression, newspapers, novels, political speech, turned out to have a genuine blind spot for something as slippery as tone, mood, and implication, drawn one frame at a time. Animation, of all things, slipped through a gap that literature almost never could. And this is where the story takes its darkest turn, because the freedom that made these films possible depended entirely on a state that eventually stopped paying for it. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Soyuzmultfilm's funding vanished almost overnight. Animators scattered, some to the west, many out of the industry entirely. The studio that had produced more than 1,500 films over 5 decades became, for a while, little more than a warehouse of decaying reels. And there's a quieter, more recent loss too. A statue of the hedgehog himself stood in central Kyiv from 2009, a small tribute to a character beloved across the entire former Soviet space. It remained there until 2025, when it was removed, one more small casualty of a war that has forced Ukraine to reconsider which parts of its shared Soviet-era culture it still wants standing in its public squares. Both losses, in their own way, tell the same story. Art made under one flag doesn't automatically get to keep its innocence once the flag changes, or once the country that raised it goes to war with the country that loved it too. If you're finding this as fascinating as I am, hit subscribe. There's a lot more behind this curtain. And yet, the story doesn't end in that warehouse. What nobody in 1991 could have predicted was that the same 1,500 films, made for an audience the state no longer existed to serve, would keep finding new audiences anyway. On television, then online, translated, subtitled, rediscovered by children whose grandparents had grown up on the exact same characters. Today, Russian animation has recovered commercially. Digital studios turn out polished, marketable content for domestic and international markets alike. It's competent, it's often genuinely well made, but almost nobody describes it the way people still describe Hedgehog in the Fog, as something closer to a poem than a product. Cheburashka, in particular, took on a strange second life all his own. Adopted as the official mascot of the Russian Olympic team for years, and beloved enough in Japan that a Japanese studio produced its own stop-motion Cheburashka films decades after the character's Soviet debut. A children's cartoon designed to slip past a censor ended up outliving the censor, the country, and the ideology all at once. Soyuzmultfilm itself survived, technically, reorganized, partly modernized, still operating out of the same Moscow building, now building a technopark meant to become the largest animation production hub in Russia. The archive itself became the real inheritance. More than 1,500 films, most of them still watchable, still streamable, still handed down the way a family passes down a favorite book. Not because a government insists on it anymore, but because several generations of actual children genuinely loved the material enough to keep it alive on their own. But the specific conditions that produce the Golden Collection, a client with no profit motive and functionally no deadline, never fully return. Because no market economy anywhere is built to offer that combination twice. Soviet cartoons weren't the best in the world because Soviet animators were more talented than everyone else on Earth. They were the best because the system, almost by accident, gave them the one resource commercial animation can never really afford: the freedom to be slow. In a system that controlled what you ate, where you lived, and what you were allowed to say out loud, the animation desk turned out to be one of the strange, narrow places where time itself was abundant. And time in art is the one material that money has never quite figured out how to manufacture on demand. No streaming platform today would greenlight a 10-minute short with a 2-year production schedule and no franchise potential. That math simply doesn't work anymore, anywhere. The studios went quiet for a while after 1991. The fog never fully lifted, and somehow, that's exactly the point. A system built to control almost everything managed, almost by accident, to leave one small door open, just wide enough for a hedgehog, a bear cub, and 2 cups of tea with raspberry jam to slip through and outlast the entire country that made them. If this story surprised you even a little, do one simple thing before you go. Hit subscribe. It takes 2 seconds, it costs nothing, and there's another story from behind the Iron Curtain already on its way. One about something else the system accidentally got right before it got so much else wrong. You won't want to miss it.